They whipped me in the yard at Kesh on a morning so cold the dew had frozen on the wire, and they made the cubs watch. I want that on the record first before anything else, because everything that came after grew out of that morning the way a fire grows out of one stubborn coal you forgot to stamp. The Vorr did not understand that. They understood a great many things, gravity, metallurgy, the long, slow arithmetic of conquest, but they did not understand a coal. They thought when a thing stopped burning where they could see it, it had gone out. I was 61 years old that morning, old for the pens. Most men my age had been culled in the first sorting when the Vorr came down the lines with their long heads tilted and their nostrils working, reading us by scent the way you or I would read a page. They could smell sickness. They could smell fear, and they prized it, and they bred it into their young like a virtue. What they could not smell, because we do not give it off, was patience. So they let me live. An old man who did not stink of dying was a useful animal, and the Vorr were nothing if not thrifty with their animals. Holdfast at Kesh had been a colony once. Ours. 40,000 souls under a thin dome of engineered air on a world that had taken 3 generations to make halfway kind. My granddaughter was born under that dome. I will not talk about her here. I only mention the dome because the Vorr left it standing, scorched and patched, and made us live beneath the same sky we had bled for, so that we would never forget who it belonged to now. That was the kind of cruelty they were good at, not the loud kind. The patient kind, the kind that wears a man down a grain at a time. Kesh did not fall in a day. I want that understood because the way the Vorr told it afterward, and they did tell it, they had heralds who chanted the conquest in the amphitheater on feast nights. We could hear it carry across the slag. The way they told it, Kesh rolled over like a tired dog. It did not. We held the dome for 2 years. 2 years of rationed air and rationed light, and the long gray grind of a siege that the rest of human space could not break through to lift, because the Vorr had cut the lanes behind them, and there was no one coming, and we knew it, and we held anyway. I was a master sergeant of the colony defense. I had been a soldier my whole life, and I had never in all of it been prouder than I was of those frightened civilians who learned to fight in a season, and held a world for 2 years against a thing that did not understand why we would not simply lie down. When the dome finally cracked, it was not courage that failed. It was the air. You cannot fight without air, and the Vorr are patient, and they waited us out the way water waits out stone. The last week is not a thing I will set down here. What matters is what came after the sorting, when they walked the lines reading us by scent, separating the strong from the weak and the weak from the dying, and putting each where it would be most useful. They made the strong watch what they did with the rest. That was a lesson too. The Vorr were always teaching. Every cruelty was a curriculum. We worked the ore galleries below the old terraforming stacks, 11 hours a day on a Kesh rotation, hauling and crushing and loading the gray rock the Vorr wanted and never explained. There were maybe 300 of us left in my block. Soldiers, most. That was the joke of it, though none of us laughed. The Vorr had sorted the strong from the weak and put the strong to work, and the strong, on a colony world that had stood off a siege for 2 years before it fell, were the veterans. They had filled their labor pens with the exact people who knew best how to take a position apart. They did not see it that way. To the Vorr, a soldier who had lost was not a soldier anymore. He was meat that had once been dangerous and now was not, the way a wolf becomes a rug. Their whole logic of the world ran on dominance, on the smell of who had bent and who had broken, and once you had been put on your knees in front of the pack, you stayed on your knees forever, because that was how it worked for them. A Vorr who submitted for life. Their hierarchies were chemical. You could no more climb back up than you could change the color of your blood. So they whipped me in front of the cubs, and they thought they were teaching a lesson, and they were, just not the one they meant. Here is how it happened. There was a boy in my gang named Rays. Not a boy, I called him that the way old men call anyone under 40 a boy, but young, and quick, and carrying a grief he had not yet learned how to set down. He had been a gunner in the war. He had watched a Vorr boarding party come through his battery, and he had not been able to stop them, and that failure rode him like a second spine. Rays worked hard and kept his mouth shut, and did everything I told him, which is why I noticed the morning he stopped doing one of those things. The overseer of our block was a Vorr called Kesh, a clan master, which meant something to them, a breeder, a holder of names, a thing of consequence. He was big even for one of them, near 8 feet of corded muscle under a coat of bristled gray, with a long jaw of back-curving teeth and pale eyes set forward like a predator's, because that is what he was. He carried a shock goad and a coil of cord whip, and on certain mornings he brought his get-down into the yard to show them the work, the way a man might bring his children to the family farm. That morning he had 4 of them with him. Cubs, the Vorr word translates to, though they were the size of large dogs and walked upright and had their parents' eyes. They lined up along the inspection rail and watched us file out into the cold, and they made the chittering sound the young ones make when they are excited, a sound like sticks in a sack. Rays was carrying a hauling yoke when he passed the rail. The smallest cub, the run of Kesh's litter, no higher than my belt, reached through the bars and raked its claws down Rays's arm. Not deep. A game. The kind of thing the adults rewarded, because cruelty to the labor was a virtue in their young and they wanted it to start early. Rays stopped. He should not have stopped. In 11 months in the pens I had drilled it into every man in my gang. You do not stop, you do not look up, you give them nothing to read. But Rays stopped, and he looked down at the little thing that had opened his arm, and the grief that rode him got the better of the soldier that carried it, and he raised his hand. He never landed the blow. I caught his wrist before it came down, and I stepped in front of him, and I put my body between the boy and the cub, and I looked up at Kesh, and I gave the Vorr what they read as submission, head down, shoulders rolled, the whole posture of a thing that knows its place, and I took it on to myself. I said it was mine. The hand, the intent, all of it. Mine. I knew what that meant. So did Rays. He fought me after in the dark of the block, said I should have let him take it, said it should have been him. I told him to shut his mouth and live. I told him the gang needed him with his back unbroken more than it needed his pride intact. He didn't understand yet. He was still young enough to think the worst thing that could happen to a man was to be ashamed. He had not yet learned that the worst thing is to be useless. They stripped me to the waist in the center of the yard and lashed my wrists to the loading frame, and they made the 300 of us watch, and they made the cubs watch closest of all, lined up on the rail with their bright forward eyes, because that was the point. Kesh did the work himself. A clan master does not delegate a teaching. I will not give you the count. There was a count. The cord whip the Vorr use is not made to flay, they are practical. They did not want to ruin a working animal. It is made to teach the body a thing the mind cannot argue with. It teaches you that you are owned. It teaches you in a language older than speech. I had heard men make sounds under it that I had never heard a human being make, and I had sworn, the way you swear about things you have not yet faced, that I would not make them. I made them. I want that on the record too. I am not telling you a story about a man who did not break. The body breaks. The body always breaks. That is what the body is for. My body broke that morning in the yard at Kesh, and I screamed and I sagged in the cords, and somewhere past the white roar of it I heard the cubs making their stick-in-a-sack sound, delighted, learning. When it was done they cut me down and I fell in the frozen mud and I could not get up, and that should have been the lesson, clean and complete. The strong animal put back on its knees. The pack shown its own strength. The young taught how the world works. But the runt came down off the rail. It came to me where I lay, and it crouched, and it put its long face close to mine so I could smell the carrion sweetness of its breath, and it spoke. The cubs learn our speech early. They think it is funny, the way a child thinks a parrot is funny. It had been listening to its sire. It gave me the words back the way it had heard them, the words the Vorr say over a beaten thing to seal the lesson, and it said them in a piping, eager little voice that I have not been able to get out of my head in all the years since. It said, "Count your family, they will all follow you, one by one." And it laughed, the stick-sack laugh, and it scampered back to the rail to be praised. I lay in the mud and I counted. That is the part the Vorr did not understand and could never have understood because they do not have the wiring for it. When a Vorr is broken, it stops counting. The chemistry shuts the door. But a human being lying in frozen mud with his back opened up, told to count his dead, a human being does exactly that. He counts. And then he keeps counting, past the dead, into the living, into the ones who did this, into the days and the shifts and the rotations, into every door and every guard and every blind spot. Because counting is the thing we do instead of dying. And the Vorr had just handed me a reason to count that would last me the rest of my life. They left me the lesson, and they took the wrong meaning home. Doc Aldous put my back together that night with field thread and a steady hand and nothing for the pain, because there was nothing for the pain, and he did not say a word the whole time, which was Doc's way of saying everything. Doc had been a battalion surgeon in the war. He had stopped being able to count somewhere around the second year of it, he told me once, had just gone empty in the place where the numbers used to live. But he could still sew, so that was what he did. He held the gang together one stitch at a time, the same way I tried to hold it together one order at a time. And between the two of us, we kept 300 men and women alive in a place built to grind them down. I want to tell you about those months honestly because the temptation is to skip them. To jump from the whip to the reckoning like the grind in the middle was just the part you suffer through to get to the good part. It was not the part you suffer through. It was the part that mattered most. The reckoning was an afternoon. The grind was a winter. We lost people. Tomas Wren went into a gallery that the Vorr knew was unstable and did not bother to shore, and the roof took him. I was 40 feet down the same tunnel when it came down, and I felt it before I heard it, the way you feel a wave coming through a deck plate. And by the time the dust reached us, there was nothing to do but dig, and we dug with our hands until the overseers goaded us back to the line because the shift was not over. We did not get him out until the next day. Wren had been a quartermaster's clerk before the war, a soft-handed man who had learned to be hard because the world made him. And when we finally pulled him from the rock, his face was calm, and that calm did more damage to the gang than any scream would have. The Vorr docked the block's ration for the lost shift, as though Wren had inconvenienced them by dying. That was the night I nearly lost the whole thing. A man named Akafor stood up in the dark of the block with Wren's blood still under his nails and said he was done. Said he would take a goad off the next overseer that touched him and open the Vorr's throat with it and let them kill him for it, because at least it would be on his feet and at least it would be a choice. And he was right. That was the worst of it, he was right, and half the block was already rising with him, and if they had gone that night they would all have died that night. 300 lists ended in an hour for nothing, and the Vorr would have smelled the fierce sweat of it coming a corridor away and been waiting. So I stood up too. My back was 11 days healed and it screamed when I straightened, and I let it show because I needed them to see the scars. I told Akafor he was right. I told him every word of it was right, that the day was coming when we would take a goad off a Vorr and open its throat, and that I wanted it as badly as he did more because I had been the one in the cords with the cubs laughing. And then I told him the truth that no soldier wants to hear and every soldier knows, that there is a difference between dying and being thrown away, and that the Vorr would take his death and feed it to their young as proof of what we were, and that I would not give them one more lesson for free. I told him we would not die on their schedule. We would die on ours, and we would take a holdfast with us when we went. Wait, I said, just wait. Help me count. Akafor sat down. I have wondered ever since what it cost him to sit down. He did not live to see the high right. The galleries took him 4 months on, but he sat down that night, and the block sat down with him. And that was the night I stopped being the old man who took a whipping and started being the man they would follow into the dark. You do not earn that with a speech. You earn it by being right when being right is the harder thing, and by carrying the same weight you are asking them to carry, and by not flinching when they look to see whether you mean it. Tully I leaned on hardest in those months. He was the biggest man in the block. a former combat engineer with hands like shovels, and a silence so total that the new arrivals thought he was simple, and he was the furthest thing from it. Tully did not talk because Tully was always listening to the rock, to the machinery, to the rhythm of the overseer's rounds, and what he heard he brought to me, a word at a time, at night. It was Tully who worked out that the Vorr could not smell us through the ore dust, that a man caked gray from a shift in the deep galleries was, to their noses, very nearly invisible. It was Tully who found the dead space behind the crushing line where two men could speak and not be read. Half of what we learned that winter, we learned because one enormous quiet man would not stop listening to the world the Vorr thought they owned. A woman named Pell hanged herself in the latrine trench with a strip of her own coveralls, and I cut her down, and I will not pretend I had not seen it coming and failed to stop it, because I had, and I did. There is no lesson in Pell. I put her here because she was real, and because leaving her out would be a lie of the kind the Vorr told about Kesh, the tidy kind, the kind that makes the grind sound like something a man simply gets through. Some of us did not get through. We buried our dead in the slag heaps because the Vorr would not give us ground. Every man and woman in my gang carried a list by then, and the lists got longer, and the Vorr smelled none of it, because grief, like patience, is one of the things we do not give off in a way they can read. We came close to losing it all a second time, 6 weeks before the right. An overseer caught Doc with his hands inside the armory panel, caught him cold, goad raised, and there was no lie in the world that would cover a man elbow deep in a Vorr lock. So Doc gave it none. He fell down. He fell down in the muck, and he shook, and he voided himself, and he made the sounds a broken animal makes, and he stank of terror, real terror, because a surgeon who has gone empty inside can summon the smell of fear the way another man summons a memory. The overseer read the scent and read the posture and read the whole picture its biology handed it, a tame thing caught somewhere it should not be, gone to pieces at a raised goad, and it kicked Doc twice and dragged him back to the line and never once thought to check what his hands had been doing. We finished the lock the following week. The Vorr's greatest weapon, the sense that had conquered us, was also the seam we worked our blade into. They could not imagine a creature whose inside did not match its outside. We were nothing but inside. And here is the thing I learned that winter, the thing that became the whole of my counting. The Vorr could not read us at all. Not really. They had built their entire dominion over us on a sense that did not work on the part of us that mattered. They could smell the fierce sweat of a man and miss the cold decision underneath it. They could smell submission in my rolled shoulders and bowed head, and never once smell the arithmetic going on behind my eyes. We were, to them, simple animals whose insides matched their outsides, and we had spent our whole lives, every one of us, soldier and colonist alike, learning to make our outsides lie. So I taught the gang to lie with their whole bodies, to stink of broken when they were not, to shuffle and flinch and keep their eyes down and let the goads of the overseers pass over them like rain. I taught them to be the rug the wolf thinks it is, and underneath the rug to count. We counted the guard rotations, and we found they thinned to almost nothing on the night of what they called the high rite, a clan ceremony that came once a Kesh year, when the breeding Vorr gathered in the old colony amphitheater to do whatever it was they did, and left the Holdfast in the keeping of a skeleton watch. We counted the armory and found it was a converted colony storehouse with a single Vorr lock that Doc, who in another life had also been a tinkerer, took apart in his head over 3 months of carrying meals past it. We counted the dome's old emergency systems, the ones the Vorr had never fully understood because they were ours, built by us, in a language of human engineering they had conquered but never learned to read. The same blindness, you see, the same arrogance all the way down. And we counted the cubs. They brought them down all winter. That was the part that worked on a man worst, worse than the goads, worse than the rations. On the bright mornings the overseers would line the young along the inspection rail to watch us file out, and the cubs would learn, would practice the contempt, rehearse the cruelty, reach through the bars when they thought an overseer was watching and approving. I marked the runt every time. I watched it grow over the season from the small thing that had crouched in the mud and given me the words to a thing that no longer needed to be taught, that hunted our flinches on its own, that had taken the lesson all the way in. It was becoming exactly what caught was, in front of me, a grain at a time, and I told myself that this was nature, that the wolf cannot help its teeth, and I knew, even as I told myself that it was not nature. It was curriculum. Someone was teaching it. And I let myself believe those mornings that a curriculum can be answered. I need to be careful here, because this is the part where a lesser man tells a lie to make himself feel clean. The truth is that in the worst of that winter, lying on my belly with my back still weeping, I counted the cubs the way the run had taught me to. I made my own list, and Cots get were on it, all 4 of them, the runt at the top. I am not proud of it. I am telling you because if I leave it out, then the end of this means nothing. A man does not earn the right to mercy he never wanted. He earns it by wanting the other thing first, all the way down to the marrow, and then choosing. The high right came on the longest night of the Kesh year. We had 300. The watch had 19. I had spent 11 months making sure every one of my 300 knew exactly what to do in the 4 minutes after the lights went. And the lights went exactly when Doc said they would, because Doc had found the old emergency cutoff behind a panel the Vorr had welded shut and never thought to wonder about, and he had spent 6 weeks unwelding it a 1/4 inch at a time with a tool ground from a hauling yoke pin. I am not going to give you a battle. The men who write battles have usually not been in one. What happened in the dark of the Holdfast at Kesh was not a battle. It was a winter's worth of counting, spent all at once, in 4 minutes, by 300 people who had each privately decided that they would rather die standing than spend one more morning on their knees. It was ugly and it was fast and it was mostly silent, because we had practiced the silence. And the Vorr, who navigate the dark by scent, who had never once needed eyes to hold us, found out in those 4 minutes that 300 humans who have decided to stop being animals are the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and that we had been standing in their blind spot the entire time, counting. We took the armory in 90 seconds. Doc had the lock open before the emergency lights had finished dying, and the first crews were through the door and into the racks, while the watch was still trying to understand why the dark smelled wrong. Because we had rolled ourselves in ore dust head to foot, every one of us. 300 gray ghosts the Vorr could not read, moving through corridors they owned by a sense we had finally learned to blind. They reached for us with their noses and found nothing, and by the time they reached for us with their claws, we had their own weapons in our hands. After the armory it was not in doubt, though it cost us. It cost us Tully. There was a junction below the clan hall where 4 corridors met, and if the watch had held it, they could have split us and bled us out a crew at a time in the dark, and Tully understood that the way he understood rock and machinery, all at once and without a word. He put himself in the mouth of it. He let 3 crews pass behind him, and then he filled the doorway with his whole enormous body and he held it. And the Vorr came at him the way their biology told them to, one at a time, each one trying to break the single human in front of it, and he broke them instead, one after another, until there were too many and he went down still in the doorway, still holding it, so that not one of them got through to the people he had let pass. We found him after. He had kept the junction closed with the fact of himself. The biggest, quietest man I ever served with, and his last act was to be a door that would not open. It cost us 9 others besides, whose names are on a list I still carry. The Vorr watch fought the way their biology told them to fight, as individuals asserting dominance, each one trying to break the human in front of it, and we did not fight that way. We fought as a unit, the way you fight when you have buried your individual pride in a slag heap next to your friends and have nothing left to assert but the survival of the people on your left and right. The Vorr had never seen it. They had no defense against it. Their whole science of us was wrong. By the time the breeding Vorr came back from their amphitheater in the gray before dawn, the Holdfast at Kesh belonged to 300 freed humans with Vorr weapons in their hands and 11 months of arithmetic in their hearts. God, I took alive. I did it on purpose, and I did it myself, the way he had done the whipping himself, because some things a man does not delegate. We cornered him in the clan hall, the old colony assembly chamber the Vorr had made over into a place of their own dominion, and he stood at bay in front of the breeding pit with his cubs behind him, and he was magnificent, and he was terrified, and he did the only thing his biology left him to do. He lowered his great head and rolled his shoulders and gave me the posture of a beaten thing, submission, the chemical surrender that for his kind was the end of all argument. He expected it to work. That is the part I keep coming back to. Kot genuinely expected that the gesture that ended every conflict in his world would end this one. He submitted, and by every law his species had ever known, that meant I now owned him, and owning a thing meant I would either work it or kill it, and he had seen what we had done in the dark, and so he believed he would die. He had made his peace with dying. What he could not imagine, what no Vorr could imagine, was a third thing. The runt was behind him. It had grown over the winter the way the young do. It still came up only to my belt. It looked at me with Kot's pale forward eyes, and it knew me. I saw that it knew me, and for the first time in its short, cruel life it understood, in whatever way its kind understands such things, that the world did not run the way it had been taught. The strong animal it had laughed at was standing over its sire with a weapon, and its sire was on the ground, and the lesson was about to be completed in reverse. My men were behind me, 300 lists, all of them as long as mine. Ray's was at my shoulder, and I could feel the heat coming off him, the grief that had ridden him for 2 years finally given somewhere to go. Not one human being in that hall would have stopped me. Most of them were waiting for it. Some of them needed it, the way you need to set down a weight you have carried too long. The runt had told me to count my family. Kot had handed me the cord whip in front of the cubs to teach a lesson about how the world works. The whole logic of the place, the whole patient cruelty of 11 months and a lost war and 40,000 souls under a scorched dome, came down to that one moment, and the small thing crouched behind its kneeling father. I counted all the way down, past the dead and into the living, into the runt's bright frightened eyes, into the future where I cut it down and its blood ran in the breeding pit and 300 freed humans cheered, and the lesson was complete and we became, finally and forever, exactly what the Vorr had always said we were, animals that bend and then break and then bite. And then I stopped counting, because that is the other thing a human being can do that a Vorr cannot, and it is the thing I want you to remember if you remember nothing else from an old man's story. We can stop. I lowered the weapon. I took Kot, bound him, walked him out, made him answer for what he had done in front of his own kind, which to the Vorr is a worse thing than death, a thing they have no chemistry for. But the cubs I did not touch. The runt I did not touch. I crouched down in front of it the way it had crouched in front of me in the frozen mud 11 months before, and I put my old face close to its young one, and I gave it the words back. Not the words it had given me. Different words. I said them quiet, so only it could hear. I said I counted your family too, and I stopped. Remember that I could, and I stopped. Go and teach it. Then I stood up, and my back pulled at the old scars the way it has every day since, and I walked out of the clan hall into the gray morning under the scorched dome of a world that was ours again, at least for a while, at least for that morning, and I let the small thing live. I have thought a great deal in the years since about whether I did right. Ray's thought I was a fool for a long time. He wanted the blood. He had earned the blood by any reckoning that makes sense to a man who has lost what he lost. We argued about it more than once, hard arguments, the kind that scar a friendship the way the whip scars a back. And then one night, years later, on a different world, with the war finally and truly over, and the Vorr clan suing for the kind of peace that conquerors only sue for when they have learned to be afraid of you, Ray said a thing to me that I have kept. He said, you know why they're scared of us now. It isn't the Holdfast. They've lost Holdfasts. It's that you put down the knife. They can't model it. They've run it 10,000 times and they can't make their numbers come out to a thing that wins a war and then doesn't finish it. It breaks their whole picture of what we are. He looked at me a while and then he said, "You scared them worse by stopping than I ever could have by going through with it." I think about the runt sometimes. It would be grown now. A clan master, maybe, with get of its own lined up along some rail. I wonder what it teaches them. I wonder whether somewhere out there, on some cold morning, there is a Vorr telling its young the story of the day the strong animal stood over its kneeling sire and counted and stopped and walked away. I wonder if that is the lesson that finally got through to them, where the whip never could, that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a creature that will do what you would not. It is a creature that could and chooses not to, and lets you live with the knowing. They whipped me in the yard at Kesh on a morning so cold the dew had frozen on the wire, and they made the cubs watch, and they thought they were teaching a lesson. They were right. My back still aches in the cold. I am old now, older than any man has a right to be after the things these hands have done, and most of the gang has gone on ahead of me, into whatever the slag heaps could not hold. Doc went last winter, quiet in his sleep the way he had earned. Ray's farms now, on a green world with a real sky, and his children come up to my belt and they are not afraid of anything, and that is the only victory I have ever fully trusted. I keep the list. All the names. I take it out on the cold mornings when the scars pull, and I read it the way the Vorr could never have understood, not as a wound but as a duty. Because the dead asked nothing of me except that I remember they were people, and that I had been one too, all the way through the worst of it, and had stayed one when the easiest thing in the worlds would have been to stop. Count your family, the small thing told me, in the mud, in the cold, with my back open to the freezing air. I do, every cold morning until the list is read all the way through. And then I get up, because that is the thing we do, the thing they could never smell and never break and never once understand. We get up, we count our dead, and we choose what we are.